Good morning, everyone. Here's an update for what's going on in Ukraine for September 19th. This will be more battlefield focused, but I'll also talk a little bit about recruitment efforts as well as some other small news tidbits. I may do multiple updates today. We'll see what kind of time I've had since I've been away for a few days with some family and work stuff. It's been a busy weekend. Anyways, interior Kremlin support for how Vladimir Putin is prosecuting this war is now crumbling around him. It's leading to Putin having to bypass Russian higher military commands and the Ministry of Defense within his own administration. He's very upset with how the military was unable to counter the Ukrainian efforts in both Kyiv earlier this year as well as Kharkiv more recently. He's receiving criticism from retired Russian officers who are calling for a proper conventional military force structure, force generation system, rather than just using volunteers and prisoners and the ill-prepared rural poor. However, Putin is unwilling to take such political risks of a mobilization, as well as not wanting to put as many Russians in harm's way as is necessary to prosecute this war in an effective manner. He knows that as if Russians out of Moscow and St. Petersburg and other major cities start dying, that's how revolutions start in that country. He prefers to use proxy forces instead from other countries or from, like I said, the rural areas of Russia, and they're really ill-prepared and are dying, unfortunately, en masse when facing a more better trained and better equipped Ukrainian military. Now, this is leading to growing inequality within the ranks. There's no cohesiveness within the Russian military. They have no unit identity, and it's causing massive tensions between soldiers and the command structure, who themselves are sometimes hastily implemented as well. There's reports of instances of Russian armed forces refusing to pay veterans their enlistment bonuses or even provide long-term medical care for those servicemen that are coming back from the war with probably life-altering injuries that will need care for the rest of their lives. Because of this, the message is permeating throughout the Russian messaging systems and their blogging services throughout all of Russia, and people are hearing this. And I've spoke before about the incentive for Russia is taking the ground, so you get an incentive for every kilometer of ground you take as a Russian soldier. However, Russian soldiers are now seeing through this ploy because they're saying Russia is on the defensive. How are we supposed to take ground? Well, to counter this, some smaller organizations such as Moscow City, their special internal forces announced that there's a recruitment drive offering 75 to 80,000 rubles, which is about $1,300, and an apartment in Moscow if you volunteer, but you also have to be below under 35 and have had military service prior. That was unsuccessful. Near Crimea, the Russians are flat out lying about how they're recruiting by saying recruits will only serve in logistics units in the rear, but upon arrival go straight to the front with little training. In the Russian city of Rostov, the Kremlin is using mobile recruiting trucks to attract volunteers by offering $2,700 a month in incentives. But the issue is the recruitment effort is massively disjointed, with incentives being implemented differently or sometimes not at all. So whether you might be in Moscow and you get this amount of money, but if you're in Rostov you get this amount of money. There's no federal campaign for how to do this. It's such a disjointed system, and that's because as much as we think of Putin being the overarching head of a nation, he's more the head of a series of independent states that, or oblasts that defer to Putin because he's dangerous. But when his weakness shows, the internal systems start to not coordinate, and you see different recruiting efforts and things of that nature between cities, between oblasts within Russia, and that's what's happening now. On top of that, there's ethnic discrimination within the Russian military, specifically in the Chechen units, where Chechen leaders are not allowing or are refusing to deploy ethnic Chechens, instead requiring non-Chechens to fight on the front lines before sending any Chechens to the battlefield. The leadership is trying to confront behavioral issues among those that they've recruited from prisons, because when you're a prisoner, often you are convicted of violent crimes such as rape, assault, murder, etc. As well as they're finding a problem where they've released drug dealers, and surprise, surprise, they're going back to dealing drugs, this time within the Russian military structure. So they have that problem now going for them. In addition, the so-called Russian-backed Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics, which are the puppet governments of Russia in those areas, are refusing to fight for each other's territory. So because they don't agree on what to do, they don't agree on each other's existence, they have very little military training, they've decentralized their military command, so Donetsk is fighting in their little bubble, Luhansk is fighting in theirs, and they won't combine. And they have different perceptions of the war, and therefore it's just more problems. I mean, Russia is hastily forming units. The Third Army Corps was formed and rushed to defend positions in Kharkiv during the Ukrainian counteroffensive, but basically melted away in the face of fierce and experienced Ukrainian fighters. Russian forces are attempting to conduct a more deliberate and controlled withdrawal in the Kherson region to avoid a situation similar to the chaotic and frankly embarrassing collapse of the Russian defensive positions in Kharkiv. Even though it seems that Kherson's counteroffensive was a feint for the Kharkiv offensive, Ukraine has still made some advances, but were stopped by the better trained and better equipped First Guards tank army from the Russian military. But they are falling back. The Russians are falling back regardless. Now, the Russians also expected the counteroffensive due to the information campaign Ukraine conducted, which is why it seems like it's slower going in Kherson. That being said, Ukrainians have destroyed a significant portion of the equipment of the 1st Tank Guards Army, capturing more equipment from the Russians than they've received from Western nations, which is significant. For instance, Ukrainian forces overran a Russian repair facility in Balaklia, which is near Izum, and seized over 200 tanks, including Russia's more advanced T-80 tanks. Given the current sanctions against Russia, these losses are impossible to replace. Now, despite the Russians being more prepared in Kherson, forcing the Ukrainians to slow progress, the experts such as General Ben Hodges believe Ukrainian forces will take the entirety of Kherson in the next 2 to 3 weeks. In response, Russia has issued a no-retreat order that came down from the Russian command. So the Ukrainians bearing down upon these Russian soldiers, are going to be facing soldiers that have to make a decision. And that decision is, do I fight to the death here, or do I flee and end up in a Russian prison or dead as a traitor to Russia? Such orders show a deep mistrust between the command of what's going on ground and the command that's at the Kremlin in the Russian military. Now, interestingly, in the Donetsk region, the Russians continue to attempt offensive operations rather than trying to reinforce their defensive positions. This is likely so that they can turn to the Russian people and say, look, we're still on the offensive, there's nothing to worry about. That being said, the intensity of artillery fire across the entire battlefield from Russia is decreasing, while resistance in major cities Russia occupies is growing amongst the Ukrainians. For instance, a shooting of Russian military personnel took place in Kherson city proper. It wasn't conducted by Ukrainian military, but internal insurgent fighters in the city. The quagmire is increasingly turning against Russia in nearly all facets. Russia is facing a well-equipped, motivated, and trained professional military, as well as an angry insurgent population in the cities they occupy, and both are being supported by Western intelligence. Russian forces continue to redeploy air defenses from locations near NATO territory. So a Finnish news outlet reported on September 18th that satellite imagery showed that air defenses in a Russian base near St. Petersburg have been partially or fully redeployed to the Ukrainian front, once again proving that this war was never about NATO for Putin. Because if Putin was really worried about NATO, he wouldn't be pulling air defenses from what will be a NATO country, which is Finland, from the NATO border to Ukraine. Why redeploy those if you're scared of NATO? He's not. It's about taking Ukraine. So that's what's going on the battlefield. I know said I was going to talk about other news, but I'm running out of time here. But I'll try to post a couple other videos specifically dealing with the meeting between Putin and Xi, what's going on with Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, as well as some other news things as well. But have a good rest of your day.